Hey guys, this episode with Abdulla is amazing. This is for anyone that wants to create a better culture within their company or wants to become a better leader themselves. Al is one of the more interesting people I've ever met. He was a pastor and then got out of being a pastor, started this really successful church, and then got into basically consulting Fortune 100 companies on how they can create better leaders within their company and also better cultures. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I have nothing but admiration for this guy. And I think you all are going to really enjoy this. Al, what's up, man?
How are you, my friend?
It's so good to see you. It's been way too long.
I'm curious what inspired your Berlin Marathon?
Oh, good question. I was actually just talking about this with Mason. So in 2018, I went to Oktoberfest with a bunch of guys. And after going to Oktoberfest, which have you been to Oktoberfest?
No.
It is so fun. It's legit probably one of
Where
the
is
most fun things I've done. It's in Munich, Germany. So I went to Munich, Germany. That's kind of where it started. You go to all these tents. They decorate it. It's actually...
This is the origin of Oktoberfest.
Yes. It's actually it's the last 2 weeks of September and then the first week of October. People think it's October, so it's all October for Oktoberfest, but it's actually just 1 week, I think, in October, but it is a week or two in September. So I was there in 2018 at Oktoberfest. And then after Oktoberfest, we took a train up to Berlin. And when we took the train up to Berlin, the day we got there was the day before the Berlin Marathon in 2018. And I'm biking through the streets and they're all shut down because they have the marathon. And the trees are changing colors. I'm seeing all these like old historic buildings and monuments and sites. And it was one of the cooler experiences, like biking through the streets. And I made a promise to myself that I was like, at some point, I would love to come back and run the Berlin Marathon. And so this year just was thinking through my goals of what I wanted to accomplish. And I was like, this would be a really cool year to check that box and see if I can get into the Berlin Marathon and then see if I can accomplish it.
Do you want to run the Boston Marathon?
Yeah. So I actually from this experience, I now have a goal of trying to complete all the majors. So Berlin being the first one, I'd love to do Boston, New York, Chicago, Tokyo, and London. Those are the 6 major marathons.
We moved to Boston in 2012, which is where I founded an organization. And right after we moved, so as a Californian relocating their family of 5 to Boston and living through winters, that was its own traumatic experience, living through all of that. But then the first year that we were there, that's when the Boston bombings happened. And we were going to be there. We used to go every year and cheer on all of the people that ran through. It's a blast cheering people on. I wouldn't want to run it. That doesn't seem like a blast. But living through that was wild. Yeah.
I will tell you that the people that make that event so incredible are the fans cheering you on.
Yeah.
As in the tens of thousands of people that line up to cheer you on and to hand out bananas and electrolytes. And then people are playing instruments and just the atmosphere is absolutely incredible. So even if you aren't running the race, I think just being a fan or a spectator and cheering people on is also incredible.
Have you competed before in areas where you have fans and spectators like that?
Yeah, I actually did the LA Marathon. So I did the LA Marathon maybe 8 or 9 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a really incredible way to see a city.
Yeah, I bet.
And yeah, LA Marathon, and then this was the second marathon that I've completed.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something though. You said that you started an organization in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it was just any organization.
Yeah.
What type of organization were we talking about?
So this is where I get a bit vulnerable because the work that I do is largely for companies, even in Fortune 500 companies down to the top 10 companies. And they'll ask me the same question. Or when I open, I say, I founded an organization in Boston. It quickly grew. I was asked to speak at some of the top universities in the city, which are arguably some top of the nation.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
Of course.
And I was speaking on leader health and organizational dynamics, all the while not realizing that, and this is kind of a line that we use, even the most well-intentioned leaders can create dysfunctional organizations. And I usually don't talk about the type of organization that I started because it can seem like a distraction, or a door slammer, when in truth, 95% of all organizations under the hood are really the same.
Mm.
So the organization that I started was a church, and I led that church, founded it in 2012. We moved to Boston in June of 2012, and we launched 3 months later in September of 2012, which I do not recommend. Yeah.
Why do you not recommend moving that quickly?
I think, well, this comes probably down to a philosophical idea of formational or spiritual communities. But that is, in my opinion and in my experience, the best way to form those communities that have tight bonds are to do it slowly with community at heart, and strengthen relationships, and you're learning to be honest with each other, be vulnerable, care for people within the community, and to grow organically. We were more attractional in nature at that time. In other words, it was like, okay, we need to raise X amount of dollars to keep this thing going. We had funding behind us. And so the best way to keep it going quickly is to launch a really amazing service and have people come in and build it that way. It's great if you want to build a crowd, but it's challenging if what you're trying to build is an authentic community that's values driven and that's based off of the mission.
Was that hard for you?
The experience?
Yeah. Or building an authentic community, because you guys grew to be pretty big from what I understand.
I think that what was hard was the emotional toll that it took on me. And as a result, probably the toll it took on my wife. So I probably, as a result of that, experienced the most extreme mental health challenges and depression between 2013 and 2016. And we could talk about that, but.
Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine what life is like as a pastor. As in you're having to put together sermons, but then you always have to be approachable, and people are constantly like reaching out. Like that probably weighs into the mental side of things for you.
I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for pastors.
Same.
Because at the end of the day, what they're asked to do is they're a CEO of an organization, and they are delivering a TED Talk essentially every week, which has about 20 hours of prep if you're going to really do it well. And in a city like Boston, which is largely an intellectual city, there's I don't know, for me it was, what's the popular term that I'm not sure if I am fully sold on it, imposter syndrome. There's an imposter syndrome, like, look, I didn't go to the top university. I'm not, in medicine or science like you. And so there's this, for me, there was a pressure to perform or deliver on a highly intellectual level, which drove me to try to know everything about everything, So there's this pressure also, I think, that pastors face, that they have to have an awareness, whether it's on politics or medicine or, areas of science or the human biology even, right? On top of theology and having all of the answers. And you're talking about, in my case, God. So it's really tough to have all the answers.
Definitely. Looking back on that, can you think of some of your favorite moments?
Oh my gosh. I have so many moments. In fact, I was recently clicking through some old photos. So my oldest daughter just turned 19 and, I'm 48 now, so you do the math. Oldest daughter is 19, but when we moved to Boston, she was 7. My middle daughter was 4, and my youngest was 1. So just last night, my oldest, she had a friend over. She's starting to date, and he asked permission to be able to date my daughter. And
wow.
what does that do for me? I start going back and looking at child pictures. And as I'm scrolling through, I'm looking at all of these years that we spent there. And, some of my favorite memories outside of probably the community that we formed, I'll throw a couple out. For one, we lived 15 minutes bike ride to Fenway Park. So I'd bike ride with my daughter to Fenway, and she's a big Poppy fan. And so we'd watch games there, man. And I lived through, the Boston winters are brutal. So you're looking for a win any way you can. So I became a Patriots fan. That was my win.
That's a good time to be a Patriots fan.
Yeah. Tom Brady he was doing it then. And then we lived through several championships. There's one moment where the building that we were in, it was in South End of Boston, which is a beautiful part of town. We had building issues that forced us to find another building. And so it was spring. And instead of finding a building, we decided to have our services outside. So we had several hundred people in a neighborhood with brownstones all around us outside, like for Easter Sunday and the Sundays leading up to that. And every week was like, it might snow this week, but it didn't. It'd be sunny. It might snow this week, again, sunny. And we would have these amazing neighborhood communities where the neighbors would be outside on their stoops. And at times we'd have just psychopaths walking by, and I would turn and talk. I had a microphone on, and sometimes I would turn directly and talk to them, and the people would be behind me, and I'm just talking my message to this person walking by, or the people that were sitting in the brownstones. We had such it was an amazing community. And I think what the city of Boston or any urban context does is it draws people. Like, you can't have a subculture of faith there. It strips it down to what is the bare essentials and what is real about what you believe, because you have a background of so many people coming into a context of a city like LA or, any major city. And that's a highly, it's a university town. So you have people from all over the world. And I think that what the common factor there that bridged the gap that I found was, let's say, vulnerability. So I stopped at some point trying to compete on the level of intellect. And I started just to be honest and vulnerable about the struggles that I was experiencing and how faith was becoming real and the doubts that I was experiencing and how I was experiencing the divine through even some of those doubts. And so because of that, I think it made it okay for other people. It drew a kind of person in our community that was also willing to be honest and vulnerable. And it was just a beautiful thing. We had a lot of people in medicine in our community, had some patriots show up, had some members from the Celtics and the Bruins. And it was a special time. But I think that in hindsight, the most powerful part of it for me was the people that became like family to us, because Boston is like a no nonsense community, man. It takes a while to build relationships, but once you build relationships with people in the Northeast, you're in forever.
Yeah. They seem very loyal.
Yeah.
That's super cool. What was the moment where you had this like inflection point of being like, okay, I'm not going to go after so much of the intellectual side of that, where you're like, I'm going to lean into more of this vulnerability or just being more of yourself? Like, how did that come about?
Probably going back to my own struggles with mental health at the time. I got a spiritual director in the Ignatian part of the faith world. And Boston College is a huge part of the community there. And so I found a great spiritual director who helped me sort of start to unravel my own need to achieve and appear competent and whatever. And through that, I started to see that if I can just be more truly who I am, then that's the one common denominator that can bridge the gap for everybody.
Definitely.
Everybody's got the same thing. Everybody's dealing with pain. Everybody's wrestling with fear. And usually that's the fear of being powerless or alone. And so
You think that's the biggest fears
those are
people
the
face?
two greatest internal fears.
Powerless and alone. Yeah.
So think about times when you have felt fear, and the way that you respond, whether it's at work or, with loved ones or in relationships. Usually it comes down to one of those two areas, like, oh my gosh, I think I'm stuck. And you're forcing me against a wall.
Mm.
Or I feel alone. Like I feel like I'm the only one who can like advocate for myself. And that's the beauty of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
A faith tells me that I'm not alone, and that that there's a power greater than me, that I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to, be the smartest in the room or the most
Intellectual. Yeah. You can just be authentically yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And through faith, like Christ sees you.
Yeah.
Christ connects with you.
Right. Yeah. And I think that a good communicator in a context like that first opens with an appeal to the intellect. Like, I don't think it's healthy to not appeal to the intellect.
I
First,
totally agree.
you want to say like, okay, here's the topic we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And here's what most studies tend to say. And then you can address the question underneath the question that most people are asking.
Definitely.
And then you can enter into the heart by saying, here's how it's affecting me.
Yes. That's probably, and I think the audience knows, but I go to church and I'm a man of faith, as you know. And I connect with pastors that are able to kind of bridge the gap on both. Mm-hmm. They talk about the intellect side, but then they also dive into like the faith side.
Yes, right.
It's hard. It's very hard to do.
It's really hard. And so I think, to your question also, just having people around me that also were willing to walk that path for themselves as well and say, oh, look, this is the kind of community that we want to create. We're not interested in playing games. It's not helping anybody. It's not helping me. So let's deal with like the root causes of what is dismantling our relationships with each other, and what is causing us to not live at our highest capability.
Yeah, just be authentically yourself.
Totally.
And just come as you are. And trying to create a community. It starts from the top down too. So if you represent that as a leader, people feel encouraged or they feel empowered to just be who they are.
Yeah.
It's cool. I bet that was an amazing community. I wish I would have known you back then.
I have I hope this doesn't sound like self-aggrandizing, but I have, to this day, we still talk to many people that were a part of that community, and they've gone off to get married from members of that church and form friendships where they still do ski trips and they do marathons and they do things together. And when they're together, they'll call me and my wife, or they'll text us. And that's some of the most profoundly rewarding aspects of that, to see these relationships that are still flourishing in the world, even if they might be living in different towns, because everybody from Boston moves eventually. You don't want to stay in Boston too long unless you're from there. And, I miss it tremendously. It's such a great town. And to hear them say, to this day, we've still never found anything as special as that was. And that is largely because of the people that formed it. It was powerful.
Yeah, super powerful. Super powerful. I mean, speaking of men's retreats, that's how you and I met, was going on that men's retreat in Idaho. And we didn't really know each other that well.
Yeah.
And we happened to fly into the same airport and have to drive 3 hours from Boise to Ketchum, Idaho. And I mean, that was some of the best 3 hour drive I think I can think of. That was incredible. We didn't know each other at all. And we just connected about your history. And then I learned all about the stuff that you're doing on the leadership side with all of these companies and founders and the Myers-Briggs stuff. And so you had this incredible experience in Boston. created this authentic community, which is so cool. I wish I would have known you back then, or at least been able to go to one of the sermons. And then you decide to pivot and come out to Los Angeles and take your life in somewhat of a different direction. Mm-hmm. How did that come about?
So this is the story that I typically tell. So I mentioned the part of, even well-meaning leaders can create inadvertently dysfunctional communities or organizations, right? And so the firm that I work with, one of the books that our founder published is called The Motive. And the motive says that every leader has to do 5 things well. Like there's a difference between a responsibility-based leader and a rewards-based leader. So a rewards-based leader is someone who has rewarded the gift of leading because of their tenure, their experience, their expertise, etc. And then once they become a leader, then they abdicate some responsibilities because they've been rewarded the role of leader. So a responsibility-based leader is responsible for a handful of things. Number 1, they have to run great meetings. 2, they have to manage direct reports well. They have to be the chief reminding officer around their clarity and the mission and purpose of the company. They have to have difficult conversations, and they have to build their team. So back to your question, I was probably abdicating at least a couple of those. I don't think that I was a rewards-based leader. I was trying to really build a community. But I was abdicating a couple of key responsibilities because of whether I felt like I didn't like that part or I wasn't good at it. And we had a situation because of that where a key member saw things differently. And I understand it's probably because of my lack of clarity and lack of having hard conversations and not managing direct reports well. And so he wanted a different seat at the table. And ultimately, our board declined and said, here's where we think you'd be best. And he declined the offer, and he ended up leaving. And I think underneath that was some of my own fears that were driving that too. And so the hard part was that not just losing him, he was a very key and valuable member, but it was also that his wife and daughters were best friends with my wife and my daughters. Mm. And so some of the unhealth that was happening at work was now creeping into my home. And it always does, right? So I had to at least look in the mirror and say, how am I co-creating this unhealth in my work? And as I was doing that, I had a friend who gave me a book, a few books actually. He started working for the firm that I now work for, called the Table Group. And he said, I think you'd benefit from this. His brother was a leader in our church. And so we started to read those books, and we started to apply some of the principles and clumsily made some progress. And there was a board member who worked at Google in Cambridge on our board, and he saw some of the work that we were doing, and he said, hey, why don't you coach me and consult with my team? And so I started doing that, and I loved it.
For Google?
For Google.
So your first coaching, consulting was?
A leader in Google. Yeah.
Wow.
And so I went to Google, and I did some work there, and I felt like this is like pastoring, but in a professional context.
Yeah.
And or in a corporate context. And I loved it. And I think what I now know that I love is that it engaged 2 of my working genius. And pastoring at the time was, at least the way that I was doing it, was largely engaging 2 of my working competency, 2 of my working frustrations.
Got it. And can we get into that, like what the difference is?
Totally. Yeah. So that's how I first entered into that world. Fast forward, I went on sabbatical, and I started a master's program for organizational design, and then found out I love that. And so I started to, but what that lacked was a coherent framework of how to help companies and leaders to make transformation within their organization. And so I came back from sabbatical and I remember journaling. I found this journal recently and it was a prayer that I said, man, I would love to work at my friend's company. To me, that was like playing for the Dodgers. I'm a Giants fan, but the Dodgers are largely a winner right now. And even though I hope they lose every time, they end up winning every game. And so to me, it was like playing for the Dodgers, right? Or the Yankees. And so I made the move back to California. That was an intentional decision. We transitioned for a year for the new leader to take my role. COVID hit, and then we ended up moving. I had 2 pastor opportunities, one in San Diego and San Francisco, and I declined both of those and opted for the lowest paying possible gig that I could find, but I was still being paid by this leader at Google, and I was consulting for an organization up in Santa Barbara. So that leader in Santa Barbara started experiencing transition, and I didn't know what I was doing yet. And so I called that same friend who was now working with his brother at the table group, and I said, hey, why don't you come and show me your framework? And he was slow at the time, so he came and we just paid for his fare and could not cover his large sum at the time, and he agreed to do it, and just out of relationship. And so he acted like I knew what I was doing, and he largely led the sessions and largely led the process. And at the end of it, I said, man, I have other clients. Will you partner with me? And he said, yeah, I'd love to. And so we started partnering together. And that's when the table group, who I now work with, they called me and asked me if I would join the organization. And so I've been with them for the last few years.
Has it been going well?
It's been great.
Yeah.
It's been great. The first year, you can imagine, like my training, my education. I was a business major in college, but after that I went into education and then I went into ministry. And so now I'm in these company settings where I'm looking around at the leaders and they're trying to solve problems. And I'm thinking, what am I even doing here? And because of the framework and the models and the intellectual property that Pat, our founder, has created, I mean, the level of confidence that I have when I go into a room with executives is so high. Yeah. I know that we can solve a problem here for this company, no matter what industry they're in, no matter what vertical any of the leaders might be in. We can help solve this problem, and we can help them become cohesive and aligned and execute on a faster level.
What are some of the techniques? And you kind of mentioned a few of them as you were talking about that, with like the different competencies, right? Of someone's a master in certain areas, or they're not so much a master in other areas. Like, what are the techniques that you guys deploy, or that, when you go and work with these founders or these companies?
Yeah. So we say that there's 2 ingredients for a company to be sustainably successful. They have to be smart, which on the smart side is all the stuff that you typically go to school for. It's the proficiencies, right? It's the tech, it's the finance, it's the operations, distribution, strategy, etc. You have to be smart. And typically when we get into a room like that, you're only at the table because you have smartness in that category, right?
Definitely.
You got hired, you went to school for that, etc.
It's kind of like your area of expertise.
Totally. Unfortunately, about 95% of all companies spend about 98% of their time on the smart side of things.
Yeah, yes, I would agree.
And so what we also say, the second ingredient to be sustainably successful, is that you also have to be healthy. And on the healthy side you have to minimize politics. So we call politics the meeting after the meeting, or changing what you say based on who's in the room. So we want to minimize the inner office politics that are happening, the backdoor conversations. And then we also want to minimize confusion. So, think about the times where nobody really is clear about what is most important right now, or why are we making this decision, or who must do what to get there. And then when we do that, we can increase productivity and we can increase morale. There's a lot of ways that we assess if a company is how healthy they are. But at the end of the day, how joyful are we when we show up to work together? And when we can do that, we minimize turnover of the unnecessary kind. That is what org health is. So how we do that then is we help them master 4 disciplines of organizational health. So discipline 1 is you have to create a cohesive team.
And this is going to help create more joy in the workplace.
Helps create more joy, helps create a more effective company.
And that's how you can tell if a company, in your opinion, is healthy or not, is what is the culture, what is the atmosphere? Is it representing something that's, I don't know the right word, but like warm, friendly, people are getting along, they're having fun, they're smiling, like that type of stuff?
To some degree, that's going to be a byproduct of it. But first, we're looking at discipline 1. Are we creating a cohesive team? So in my work, team is the most overused 4-letter word in corporate society, right? Everybody's a team. Everybody has a team. But there's a huge difference between a golf team and a basketball team. So a golf team is what we call a working group. And a working group, like a golf team, goes off and shoots their best scores, and they come back and they compete or they compare notes. But they're not cohesive. And a basketball team is one that is essentially practicing 5 behaviors. So there's thousands of ways that you can build a team, probably, but there's 5 behaviors that will wreck a team. And so we help them build the necessary kind of psychological safety or trust so that they can have more conflict in the room. Why more conflict? And we'll say, we're not conflict resolution experts. We're here to help you have more healthy conflict. So churches, for example, are notorious for being having what we call artificial harmony. And so under artificial harmony, we agree, we give the Nike nod, and guess where that comes from? We give the Nike nod, like, yeah, we're aligned, we agree with that decision, and we go to the parking lot, what the hell is that decision? And can you believe that why is he still here? Why is and so that's happening.
Because people are choosing to be more agreeable.
More agreeable. So if they can have higher levels of trust, we can have higher levels of conflict or debate so that we can have very clear commitments. So we're not looking for consensus for leaders. We're actually trying to remove this idea of, is everybody on board? No, we're looking for, have we had the necessary conflict? Have you had your opinions on the table? Have you had your opinions on the table? And so that we can, at the end, the leader can say, I've heard everybody's opinion. Here's my decision. Can you commit to my decision? Can you commit to it? Can you commit at the highest level? This is modeled by, there's a leader named Todd Spoleto from North Face. When our company went and worked with their team, this was the example that we give because it was a perfect case. They go to market on a jacket that they think is going to revolutionize the industry. The jacket, it does terrible, when it goes to market. And so they have all of the best leaders at the table asking why and what the solution is moving forward. And 2 leaders argue vigorously. And by the end, Todd stands up and says, I've heard everybody's perspective. I've heard, your 2 perspective. The question I have is, here's my decision. Can you commit to my decision? Not do you agree with the decision, but can you commit to this and can you take it to your team in a way where you say, here's the decision we made as a team? Then if we have that level of commitment, we can have healthy forms of accountability, not hub and spoke accountability where I'm the leader. Now I have to go to you because you said this, but you're saying, no, actually the problem's over here. So now I got to go over here. No, we're having peer-to-peer accountability like you would see on a football field or a basketball court where one player says, hey, you missed that block. Or why aren't you going to the lane? This was the play. And nobody says, gosh, I can't wait for the coach to talk to him because he's really going to get it when the coach goes to him. So if we have that level of cohesion together, we can hold each other accountable behaviorally because most people are hired for proficiency, but they're fired for behavior. So when we have that level of accountability, then we can have collective results. Results is why we're in business. So if we have collective results together that's rooted in those key areas, then we can get to discipline 2, which is now we're mastering clarity together. We're rowing in the same direction, and we're using our clarity as a form of strategy for decision making. So we're answering 6 what we call critical questions. Why do we exist? How do we behave? What do we do as a business? How will we succeed? What differentiates us? What's most important right now? What's the number one priority that we're shooting for, and who must do what?
So you have to have buy-in first, and then you can work to clarity.
Right. And so there's some companies, consulting firms, that are very popular, and they focus largely on the clarity first, which is helpful. But if we got to clarity and underneath it, people are actually disagreeable, and there's like politics happening, and there are silos forming, that's where the real unhealth is going to unfold. So once we have that clarity, then disciplines 3 and 4 is we have to over communicate that clarity, chief reminding officer. And that's the hardest for leaders. And then we have to reinforce that clarity through simple systems, like human systems, not bureaucratic ones. And the way that we measure this, now coming back to your question, is how are the meetings? How are people showing up in the meetings? How are they behaving in the meetings? How are they driving for clarity and closure? How are we forming debate to get to the best decision possible? And are we doing that faster? So we'll observe people in their meetings. We call it the native environment, because that's really where this leader is operating. And we want to observe how are these decisions being made. So yes, joy is a huge factor, but underneath that joy is, are they also engaging in conflict? Are we debating the best ideas? Is it going off the rails? Are we going, are we not discussing what needs to be discussed? And how's our collective results?
What would you say from the meetings that you've been a part of? What are some best practices leaders can implement in these meetings?
Number 1, agendaless meetings. And that's hugely unpopular.
Agendaless.
Yeah. And
because it's like you read, you're like, oh, send me the agenda ahead of time. Or
right.
like, what are all the things that we're going to talk about in this meeting? And you get like a list of things you got to go through.
Exactly. And usually it's because each person's showing up to the meeting like they're an advocate for the UN. Like they're advocating for their department and resources to pull into their department. But what we're trying to reform the thinking around is this is team number 1. So if I'm on Sean's team and Sean's side of the boat is sinking, then I don't say, well, Sean's screwed.
Yeah.
No, it's the company now. I'm a part of this team 1 at the top level. And if Sean's side of the boat is sinking, that means my side of the boat is sinking. So what do we need to do to rally, to leverage your side of the boat? So the first thing I would say is agendaless meetings are so important because, and notice I didn't say unprepared meetings. We have to be prepared of knowing how we're going to discuss what's in our playbook for this particular quarter. But showing up with agendaless meetings helps us to have conflict in the first 10 minutes. Your favorite movies have 2 things in common. Think about the first 5 minutes. What happens in the first 5 minutes of a movie to keep you in? What is it?
A problem.
A problem. So we want to unearth the problems immediately and see conflict happening within the first 10 minutes.
So
with an agendaless meeting, we have a lightning round, and then we're measuring our scorecard based on a stoplight system. And we want to see conflict happening around the stoplight system. Even.
What does that mean, stoplight system?
So there's a scorecard that has their rallying cry or the most important thing that we should focus on right now. And then we have defining objectives that are helping us to get to that most important thing. And each of those defining objectives, we have to be able to say, is settling lawsuits right now? Let's say that's that's one of our defining objectives, is to settle legal or to build morale or to repair vendor relationships.
And so everyone will kind of have buy-in on the scorecard of what's most important to least important?
Yep. We've already created that ahead of time.
Okay.
And now every meeting, we're scoring how well we're doing on each of those defining objectives. And inside of those defining objectives sits real, measurable, maybe they're KPIs or some form of, execution. So when we're measuring that, we haven't even gotten to the agenda yet. So anything that's red or yellow, that's going to be probably a topic for discussion. Anything that's in the lightning round of here's what I'm focused on, top 3 things this week. Maybe there's a few things that the leader feels that should be focused on as well. And then now we have an agenda, maybe 15 minutes in, and now we're focused on these 6 or 8 things. Because of that, I would say the second thing is a clear way to measure your progress. So a scorecard. And then the third thing I would say is a clear way to say, how will we have more discussion based on, do we need more or less subject matter experts in the room? Do we need more time? Do we need to make more decisions? Okay, we need to have an ad hoc strategic meeting around this topic. Who needs to be in that meeting? So that's probably the third thing. We need a clear way to say, how will we have a meeting that comes of this? And the final and probably most important thing is what we call an end of meeting discipline. So we stop the meeting 10 minutes ahead of time and we say, here's what we discussed. Here's what we decided. Here's who's doing what. Because that is really the way that you'd be surprised. We say 10 minutes because people say, wait, I thought we said we're going to do X and Y. And I thought Jane was in charge of that.
Yeah.
And so we're being very clear on what we decided. And then we finally say, as a part of that end of meeting discipline, so then based on this, what will we cascade? What will we say and what will we not say coming out of this meeting? That's where we get to, here's the decision that our team chose to make, that I'm communicating to my next level team, rather than Sean's in charge. I try to go to bat for us, but it's his decision at the end of the day. No, we're all collectively saying, here's what we will say and here's what we won't say coming out of this. So the decisions are very clear.
And you have buy-in from everyone because they're agreeing to everything, and you have a summary at the end, so everyone's like clear on what the expectations are moving forward.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, and
I mean, that's super helpful. Like, I think with the way I run meetings, it's just that little part at the end where it's like having that summary, the last 10 minutes is so crucial. Because if you don't have that, then communication is like, it's tough. Sometimes like, we don't, like, you think I'm, when we communicate with one another and you say this back, and this happens with like conversations, if you're in arguments, like if you ask someone like, hey, what did you get from what I just said? And they say back what they think you said. And you're like, that's not what I was trying to say at all.
Exactly.
Like that happens so much. And so having that ability to concisely summarize everything to make sure everything is crystal clear, I think is so important.
It's so important. I think it was George Bernard Shaw, one of my colleagues, quotes this, and he does it way better than I do, so I forget every time. Shout out to Tim Cooper. He says, so let's pretend it's George Bernard Shaw, who said, the greatest misnomer about communication is to assume that it happened.
That's so true. And I feel like I have like come to that conclusion more so recently because I've been starting to ask people, like, after all the meeting, I'm like, okay, what were the main things you took away? And then they start repeating back to me. And it's been a moment for me to be like, okay, I wasn't totally clear on that. And like, it's helped me kind of rethink how I'm communicating with people.
I worked with one team in Salt Lake City, which was, the leader was a highly intelligent leader. And he was a strong leader, and his team was around the table. So going back to discipline 3 around over communicating clarity. Yeah. He said, I'm going to say this for the 1,000th time. And then he goes on to say what he's going to say. And my friend and colleague says, "What? Can I just pause for a second? I'm going to ask around the room, who's hearing that for the first time?" And every hand went up. And for him as a leader, he's a strong leader, strong-headed leader, but he's at least open to, if he sees data, then he's willing to go with it. And so he looks around the room and he says, oh, I guess I'm not over-communicating.
Yeah. So good. So good. So something else you and I have talked about in the past, which I think is really interesting, is these areas of competence. You have different types of strengths, and you broke it down for me one time, and I thought it was so interesting. Could we go through some of that? Yeah.
So we're talking about the working genius?
Yeah. That's what you call it, the working genius.
Yeah. So the working genius was, well, I can talk about the origin of it if you want later, but essentially it's this idea that every job that we do is a 6-letter job. So it starts with wonder. What should we do here? Are we solving the right problem? What's the capacity or capability? Are we having the right conversation? That question of wonder then leads to invention. So somebody with a genius of invention loves a whiteboard, for example, and loves to take the question of the wonderer and say, I have a solution. Here's an invention. And they love to draw models and charts and et cetera. That's our founder of the company. That's his genius.
The invention
Genius. So wonder leads to invention, which then leads to discernment. So the genius of discernment is this, and I'd love for you guys to think about which parts of these do I naturally gravitate toward. So the genius of discernment is that I intuitively feel at a gut level that this is a great solution or it's not a great solution. Like, yeah, this is the way we should go, or no, this doesn't feel right. And they don't necessarily need more data points, although maybe they're proficient with data, but they don't need more data because they intuit at a gut level if this should fly or not. Now, some of the misnomer is that your discernment is always correct, and that's not necessarily the case because you can have a team with 4 discerners on the team and they have different perspectives.
Yeah, totally.
And sometimes a conversation can spin because we're discerning too much. And so that genius of discernment, there's a decision line between discernment and the next genius that we get to, which is called galvanizing. And so the galvanizer loves to pull or push people toward motivation. And the misnomer there is that this must be the cheerleader. And that's not necessarily what they're doing. They're really great at moving people towards the target that we need to go on. That genius then leads to the genius of enablement. And so enablement is motivated largely by helping people reach their potential, helping the team get to where they need to go. I'm motivated at that point, if I have the genius of enablement, by just helping you do what you need to do. And then that leads lastly to the genius of tenacity. So you notice WIDGET spells widget. And so the genius of tenacity is it's the ground level. So if wonder sits at 30,000 foot and tenacity sits at 5,000 to 0 feet or ground level, then tenacity is somebody who loves to check the boxes. So if you give them a task list, their first task will be make a list just so they can check it off. And, I got that checked off. And they're great at executing and accomplishing. And so when we do a team assessment report, we can identify the genius and the frustrations on every team and where the gaps might be on that particular team. And what happens when you're missing a genius or what happens when you overuse a genius on a team. So the idea that every job is a 6-letter job then splits up into every project as a 3-phase project. So it starts with ideation, wonder, and invention, and then it moves on into activation, discernment, galvanizing, and then it moves into implementation, which is enablement, tenacity. So real-time story, I worked with a team that's valued over $1 billion. It's in the green energy space, in a couple of locations, U.S. based and foreign. And the U.S. base has 2 locations, and so they have a hybrid team, one in West Coast and one in the Central area. And this team got together. They're hybrid, so they're having Zoom meetings, and they discussed a potential solution. So one member on the team has the genius of wonder. Are we talking about the best thing? And then tenacity. I'm going to go work on it. And so they bring up a solution and he begins to work on it. But the people in California say, why are the people in the other location working on these things? Are they fracturing? Are they not a part of the team? And so the stories we tell ourselves, because we don't either A, understand each other's working styles, which is a way to build trust, or B, we haven't spent enough time or defined clearly which stage of work we're in, can have huge economic implications. So when we started working with them, we said, how much time did you spend in activation? In other words, how much time did you spend discerning and then finally say, this is the decision, let's galvanize the team around this? And they said, almost none. So when we're not clear around which stage of work we're moving into and which stage of work this meeting is happening in, we can make all sorts of all sorts of errors.
From a percentage standpoint of the population or of leaders, where do you see in those six, where do you see most leaders lean? Like, is there a percentage of people that are 1 to 10%, and then maybe people that are discerning, it's 30%? When it comes to leaders, like, what's the breakdown in your opinion?
Great question. There's a huge absence of wonder in the leadership teams that I work with because it's the most imperceptible genius. It happens at such a subtle level of somebody saying, are we even talking about the right thing right now? Is this the right solution to solve? And so there's a lot of missing wonder, a lot of, and it largely depends on the particular team. So if I'm working with an operations team in Google, that's, 10 levels lower than the executive team. That's a team largely filled with enablement tenacity. They're just ready to get it done. And so therefore, this team is largely reactive and sees themselves putting out a lot of fires. And the proactive levels at wonder and invention. And so they say, like, we're an operations team. Why would we even care? We're not here to invent solutions. The solution has been created. And so we'll say, but at some point, one of your meetings has to be a wonder invention type of meeting, so you know that you're focused on the right issues and that you're removing unnecessary distractions.
So it's important for people that maybe don't have that genius to have moments where they're leaning into the other geniuses.
100%. And well, actually, the way to lean into it sometimes is to borrow a genius from somebody else.
Got it.
In a different team.
It makes sense. Like, if you're strong at something, find a partner who complements your strengths.
Exactly.
Right? Maybe things that you're not strong at.
Yep.
Like, they say that, like, you have a sales guy and then you have like an operations or finance guy. Like, those two teammates go together pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes the misunderstanding is for people to say, well, I guess I got to increase my weakness. And that just is not the way to grow, right? You're going to lean into your strengths. And so if I'm working with a leader who can maximize her or his capability and time, in other words, they're in charge of their time. A lot of people don't have this luxury if they're in corporate world, right? But if it's an entrepreneur who can have control of his or her schedule, then I will say, what are the roles and responsibilities in your job that leverage your genius? Let's spend in other words, what's the 20% for you that drives 80% of your effectiveness?
And how do you help leaders or people come to those conclusions?
Practically, we have a list where we just say, let's create an activity log. Out of this activity log, which activities are you seeing high levels of engagement and high levels of energy? Anything below an 8 for me, I'm going to suggest that you don't do that. Either you'll do one of three things. You're going to eliminate those areas, you're going to automate those areas, or you're going to delegate them, or you're going to elevate anything that is an 8 or above. So by elevating, we're going to try to create a schedule for you where you're only doing 80% of your time is in the 20% that drives 80% of the results.
Definitely. That takes some self-awareness.
Huge self-awareness. It takes work. So I did this with a mutual friend of ours who was a former Navy SEAL. And we helped him get really clear on what is and this is borrowing from another, a coach that I am coached by. What is your unique ability or unique genius? So let's list out everything that you do in a catalog. Then from that catalog, then let's also say, what are the top 3 to 5 things that bring you motivation and fascination? Mm-hmm. What we like to say is that people don't burn out because they're doing too much work. People burn out because they're doing too much of the wrong kind of work. So you could probably do what we're doing here, 8 hours a day and not feel tired.
Absolutely.
You could probably galvanize your team all day and not feel tired. You could discern ideas that are coming towards you and whether or not we should do this or not and not feel exhausted. But if you're having to do tax work or, fill out the 1099 or blah, blah, blah,
Yeah, you read
you're
me
like,
perfectly.
please just,
Yeah.
So we try to identify based on that activity list, what are the ones that bring you motivation and fascination. Let's list them out in one bubble. We'll call that your genius. What are you good at? But the more you do it, it kind of like eliminates some energy from you. We'll put that in another bubble circle. We'll call that your competency. And then what are the things that just drive you nuts that you hate doing? If you had to show up and do that at work, you would cry every day. And we'll call that your frustration. We want to eliminate those. We want to automate the others, and we want to elevate the geniuses.
There's an organization called Strategic Coach.
So that's who I'm being coached by.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Strategic Coach.
I am too.
And
I should have called you because I'm in the Santa Monica cohort right now.
Really?
Yeah.
Is this your first year doing it?
First year.
It's amazing. Who's your leader? Matt? Is it Matt?
No, it's is it Brent?
Anyways, they're amazing. I did it for like 2 or 3 years. I didn't do it this past year, but I have nothing but great things to say about Strategic Coach. But they're incredible at like figuring out what this genius is that you're talking about. And as entrepreneurs or as leaders, you're pretty good at knowing the stuff that you don't want to do. You're like,
Right.
ugh, this isn't my genius. I don't want to do this, so you stay away from it. But where I find I get into trouble, and some other people that I've talked to get into trouble, is you play in your genius, but you do that middle section that you're talking about, which is like you're competent.
We call it the competency trap.
Yes, it's such a trap. It's such a trap.
'Cause you're
one
good
of
at
the
it.
things that I loved about Strategic Coach
Right.
is like trying to get you away from those 2 areas so you can lean into that genius.
Yeah, and I think that's my struggle right now is that so what you're talking about is very much targeted toward an individual. That's what Strategic Coach does really well. They talk about self-managing teams, but at the end of the day, to build a truly cohesive engine of a team, that's where we come in as table group. And so I'm such a collector of tools that I don't always know how to spend my time in which category, you know? So I'm periodically, if I'm coaching a leader on the side, and I do that for a handful of leaders, kind of all I have time for, I'll use some of Strategic Coach mixed in with all the table group stuff we're doing.
Definitely. That's why it's like, I mean, would you say discernment is one of your geniuses?
It's a competency for me.
Yeah. What would you say your geniuses are?
So my genius is the rarest combination of all. Only 4.3% test as wonder galvanizer, which actually creates a unique.
It's perfect for your job.
It's perfect for my job. It's not perfect for my mind, and drives my wife crazy. So yeah, which is also working genius is helpful for marriage. Or in my case, marriage or relationships.
How has it helped in marriage relationships?
Because we tend to judge people with geniuses that are different from ours. And then we tend to shame ourselves when we're not good at some other thing. So an example is my wife, one of her geniuses is enablement. She loves to serve people. She never wants to be out in front. This kind of thing would probably drive her nuts. And she loves like just serving people behind the scenes. And so a great weekend for her would be to just make something for somebody and make sure that they're taken care of and do that. And that would drive me bananas. I want to think about it at a high level, ask, are we solving for the best problems? Is this the best possible solution? And then I want to get people rallied around it. And so in years prior, I probably would have judged her for not being more like me. And that's a whole nother conversation around control.
Yeah, but now that you have that self-awareness or you understand these different competencies or geniuses, as you say, you can then appreciate her genius and understand it more.
Right. Exactly.
Which I think goes to having a relationship with someone, but, also in teams, like seeing people for their geniuses
Yeah.
and then putting them in positions where they can be leaning into those things.
Yeah. So trick question. This is a trick question. So we'll ask it. What do you think is the best kind of leader? What's the best combination for a leader?
Well, it's a trick question, so maybe I shouldn't answer it. But the first thing I thought of was, being a man of faith, and I know you are too, as a service leader.
Yeah. So something along those lines, it's the self-aware leader. So even though I might see a lot of, let's say, IDs, and there is a thing called the ID loop within Working Genius, like you're inventing your own solution, then you're discerning it for yourself, and you're like, oh, for sure, this is the way we should go. But I might see a lot of IGs or galvanizing tenacity people as leaders in the company. I also see a lot of other combinations, and what makes them great is when they understand who they are, understand their strengths, play to that, understand what causes them to fall into a vicious cycle and how to switch into a virtuous cycle, or a pain cycle and switch into a peace cycle. And then and they can leverage the strengths of the people around them.
Yeah, I love this. This stuff is so good. Could we go through an exercise where we figure out what one's genius is?
Yeah.
Could you and I do it?
Yeah.
Is there like questions you ask?
So,
and I'm sure anyone in the audience, like just broad questions that I can answer, but then like the audience can be thinking of like.
All right, let's do a little story.
Okay.
So let's say we're on a plane.
Mm-hmm.
The three of us are on a plane.
For the audience, Mason is here. He's.
What's up?
Shout out to Mason.
Shout out to Mason. He's making sure everything runs smoothly.
Mason's in his socks right now, which is so. Maybe I'm gonna go socks right now.
Socks leader.
But I think I have two different color socks on, which makes it better.
Yeah, that does make it better.
Okay, so
Very original.
let's say we're in a plane from East Coast to West Coast, and may it be a private plane. Thank you, God. And in this private plane, we take off and we're heading towards West Coast. And there's somebody that stands up and says at some point, wait, are we even going the right direction? What are we doing here? Is this the right solution? What are we trying to get to? We have time here. Like, we need to maximize our time. Are we doing that? Somebody else with a genius of invention says, oh, I have a great solution. Why don't we head towards LA? We can stop off, see Sean and Mason, be a part of the podcast. We'll get dinner at Scopa, and then we'll board and head back, and we'll make the most of our time. The person with discernment says, I don't think that's a great idea because I don't know that we have enough fuel to get there, and I think that it'd be better if we stopped off in Salt Lake City and went to Silicon Slopes. There's a company that we can meet with there to leverage our relationships and our capital. And then maybe tomorrow we head to LA. The genius of invention says, that's a great idea. How about we do it this way, X and Y, and we arrive at this time. Discernment says, that's a great idea. Galvanizer says, great, we have the decision. Let me get everybody on board, rallied around that decision. I'm going to tell the crew and the pilot and whoever else is helping and whoever's with us, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it, and make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do. The person with a genius of enablement says, what do you need from me? Like, do we need snacks? Do we need people? Do people need to be helped on and off the plane? Do I need to call and make sure that there's somebody there waiting for us? How can I help us? The genius of tenacity is sitting there and says, let me make a list of how we know we arrive and we've accomplished what we want to accomplish. Oh, this is the decision we're going to make. Well, do we have the proper fueling when we get there? Do we have people to help us on board, etc.? I'm going to make a list, and I'll make sure that everybody gets on and off the plane at the appropriate time. And when they do, I'll make sure that it's crossed off the list. So out of that little vignette, which are the two areas that you would naturally gravitate toward?
For me, the number 2 and 3.
So invention and discernment, or discernment and galvanizing?
It was the idea of like, we should go to when you asked me where we should go, like, hey, we should go to LA, we should go to Scopo, like that. And then it was also the person who was like, well, actually, maybe scope is not the best solution. Maybe we should go to, well, I don't know what city you said, but you said some other city, have a meeting there, and then go to LA tomorrow.
Yeah.
It was, those kind of spoke to me.
Yeah. So those three, it matters what your top two are, and then also matters what your first competency is, because sometimes when we do more work together, we can discern, is this actually a competency for me, or is this like what I love to do?
Yeah.
So do I love to come up with a blank whiteboard and create frameworks? And
I don't really love that, to
I
be honest
think
with you.
that your genius probably is discernment galvanizing.
Yeah, which is so interesting because it was easy for me to know exactly what wasn't me.
Right.
The ones that weren't me jumped right out at me, but the other ones I'm like, oh, I could see myself doing that.
Would you
Yeah, I
love
could
to
see
be a
myself.
shark on Shark Tank?
I would enjoy that.
Done.
Yeah.
Discernment galvanizer.
Yeah, I would enjoy that. What about you, Mason?
I think the second one, I'm going to play it safe and land in Salt Lake City. I'm not trying to go down in this plane.
Is that because you're afraid of
I'm
planes?
patient. Like, we'll get, no, I'm not. I'm good with flying. I want to get there, but I'm okay with being patient and like stopping for a night.
Yeah.
And then I'd say the other thing is probably rallying around and getting people on board.
I can see that.
What would be a frustration for you? Like if you had to do those pieces, it would be frustrating.
Frustrating would probably be whoever the one that's like, okay, like tell me what you want from me and I'll do it.
Enablement.
That sounds like the worst thing to do, and I think being like when I'm in the situation of the other things, I feel bad telling that person what to do because I know I hate it so much. Like hearing you say that people like that's inherently like what people want to do and are good at.
Exactly.
It's almost peace of mind.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I hired my business manager, I was looking specifically for that enablement and tenacity. And when I delegate to her, I feel guilty sometimes because I hate that. I hate those pieces. And so that's what I'm saying is this can alleviate guilt and judgment from other people or from ourselves. So it's a powerful tool for an individual. But when you see it at work with a team, identifying who should be in this meeting, what is this meeting that we're doing? What do we label it as? What are we solving for? And then how to then take it to the next step. And here's the real kicker. In a meeting like this, let's say that the three of us are meeting around something. We will take this meeting up to or down to the level of our genius, because it's where we feel that we have the most value and it's where we feel most comfortable. Yeah. And so the conversation will kind of go off rails, but under the hood, when I'm observing, I'm saying, oh, he's just taking that back up to his genius. And we've already passed that genius. That was 2 weeks ago. We're at enablement tenacity now. So if I come up to you with my great questions about, are we really doing this thing? Is this the way we should go? We're like, bro, we did this 2 weeks ago. We already discerned and we decided, and this event is next week.
Yeah.
This is a great question for next year, but right now this is what we're doing.
Yes. That's so interesting because there's people that approach you and you're like, what are we talking about? Like that was a great question maybe a month or 2 months ago. Like we're fully in this. We just got to keep like moving forward. But then I could also see how epic and amazing it is to have someone in the room that has your genius of wonder, that when you're in the stage of just trying to visualize and imagine what could be, having that genius in the room, how great that is.
So I was observing a meeting for a company that's LA based, Tuesday. And they were talking about a topic and moving forward and now they're getting squirrely and they're sidetracking. And then, the person with the genius of wonder, and I saw him do it, and they're now using the language. He says, I'm going to ask a wonder question. Is this the right conversation we should be having? What are we solving for?
Yeah, and the person whose discernment is like, yes, this is the right question, or no, this isn't the right. They can decide pretty quickly, but it's good to have that kind of like, they call it like a spot check.
Yeah.
You know, the wonder person can ask the question, and the discernment is like, yes, it is, or no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's so important. Well, this is cool, dude. This is so cool. I mean, we just literally got into all the work stuff. We didn't even get into Myers-Briggs.
No.
Is that something we want to say for another time?
Yeah, maybe.
That's okay with you.
So we'll use Myers-Briggs as a tool primarily for, and I know, so there's a lot of misunderstanding around, is Myers-Briggs verifiable, or what's the validity of it, and consistency. Those are the two terms that they use for tracking whether a tool is actually beneficial or scientifically reliable. There's definitely answers to that. When Carl Jung created this, he said there was dichotomies that people run into, right? And there's a way that you're energized. There's a way that you tend to be energized. There's a way that you tend to take in information. There's a way that you tend to make decisions. And there's a way that you tend to order your world. That's sort of irrefutable. In other words, this is a preference. It doesn't mean you're not good at all of it. Mm-hmm. It's just you prefer to order your world, take in information, make decisions, and be recharged in a particular way. It's not whether you're outgoing or not. The way we use Myers-Briggs is when we see there's high levels of distrust on a team, we'll use Myers-Briggs because that's a personality tool.
Yeah.
That's a preference tool. And the way that we do it is to get to vulnerability-based trust quicker. When we are trying to increase productivity, we'll use working genius with the team.
Got it. Can I guess your Myers-Briggs?
Sure.
We kind of talked about it, but I don't fully recall, but getting to know you a little bit,
yeah.
I'm going to guess that you're an I. I think you are big picture, so I think you're an N. The F or the T is tough for me to decide, but I'm going to lean more towards F and probably a P.
So INFP?
INFP.
So I test as ENTP.
Wow. So I got one right.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
I test as ENTP.
ENTP.
Yeah, but
I love those people.
But my T and F are very close. There's a spectrum, and my T is just marginally over the F.
Got it. So you're energized by people.
I'm energized by people.
Yeah, and then your big picture, which I guess I got that right.
Yeah, but there's a story to this, and that is I recently did a interview process. I wasn't satisfied with it, so I did an interview process, and I said, sit with me for 3 hours, and I want you to do a deep dive. And this person said the way after, and they filmed me, and then they went back and watched it, and then came back and said, after watching you, you're at your best self. You're at your best preference when you are an ENTJ. And then I was sitting with a colleague who is a self-professed expert in it. And he said, the moment we got on this call, by looking at you, and then a little bit by our conversation, he knows me a bit. He said, I would bet my life savings that you were an ESTP, which happens to be the most, apparently mistyped for ENTJ, and the one that is not satisfied with any of the types. They're like, I could be that, or I could be that, or I could be that. So I am energized by people, but I a lot of times will preserve my energy based on who I'm around.
Yeah, makes sense. The NT and the NF really connect.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why you and I hit it off right off the start, because I'm an ENFJ.
Yeah. Right.
And the NTNFs definitely complement one another.
Yeah.
But I'm on the verge, and sorry for the audience that's listening that doesn't know Myers-Briggs. It's incredible, and I highly recommend taking the test. But the J and the P is the one that it depends on the situation. If I'm with a hard J, I'm going to be more of a P. But if I'm with more of a P, then I turn into the J. And then in work situations, I'm a J. But then like in social situations, whether I'm traveling, I'm actually a little more of a P.
So where it really maps out in terms of personal development is when, if anybody's listening, if you can imagine a car, and in a car you have a driver, a co-pilot, and then two people in the back. And so if you are an ENFJ, for example, what the world would see would be extroverted feeler who sits in the driver's seat, and your co-pilot is an introverted intuitive. And so you have to take the decisions back to, okay, what are my personal values? How do I internally feel about this? How is this aligned with my own direction to make proper decisions? And then in the back seat is what sits your teenager or 10-year-old, and that is the self part of you that is most uncertain. And so ENFJ, that would be extroverted thinker. And that's like a teenager. And so I have teenagers. And so a teenager can oftentimes act in ways that, man, I want to be seen as an adult here, but I also feel a little bit of uncertainty underneath the surface. And then the baby is the remaining, it would be the extroverted sensing. So I have to draw that out as there's,
well, the next time you're on, we're going to do a session on just Myers-Briggs.
Yeah. And so the way that you self-develop is if the two on the right, the passenger and the teenager, those are parental functions. Like you use that for other people. And then the two on the left, the driver and the baby, you tend to use that for yourself. But the path of growth is to really develop your co-pilot and make sure that you're making decisions that way.
Love it. So good, man. Al, it was so good to see you. This was awesome. Thank you for all of what you just shared. And you are an expert in all these things. And I feel like, gosh, anyone listening is just probably taken away a lot because I know I have. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. And I guess the last question I'll ask, any books you'd recommend?
Too many, but...
Do you like a few that the people can read?
Yeah. The one I would highly recommend is The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni if you're looking to develop your team. If you're looking to grow as a leader, The Motive in terms of what you need to be doing. And in terms of like inner work, I think How Emotions Are Made is a powerful one.
Cool. Al, you're the man. Thanks for being on.
Thank you, brother.